I chopped off the hands and heads of my victims with an axe. How many victims did I exactly make? I know it very well. More than 85 and less than 100. It's me, Richard Cottingham, also known as the Butcher of Times Square. Between 1967 and 1980, I ended the lives of 6 people with a terrifying brutality. In broad daylight, I played the role of a good husband, a father of 3 responsible children, and an IT guy considered a model employee. However, when night fell, I donned a wig, took on a fake name, and set out hunting prostitutes in the streets of New York. My penchant for psychological torture was evident. I enjoyed taking my time, playing with my victims. Each of my actions was meticulously calculated. Hotel rooms became the stage for my dark designs, where, to avoid identification, I chopped off the hands and heads of my victims with an axe. For years, I roamed the nighttime streets with impunity before finally being apprehended. The sentence was harsh: 268 years in prison for the rape and murder of only 5 women.
You heard about the man who vanished mid-flight? And of course you know that's what this week's episode is about. So in 1928, Alfred Lowenstein was on a small plane heading from London to Brussels. When about halfway through the flight, he gets up out of one of these seats and heads towards the back to the bathroom. Eventually, he's back there for so long that someone gets up to go check on him. Except when he gets back there, Alfred's not in the bathroom. And the only sign he had even been there was his tie, which was on the floor. The man looked around and saw that Alfred was not on the plane anymore at all. To better understand what could have happened, we need to look at the layout of the plane. So this back of the plane is separated from the rest of the plane by a door that closes. And if we look at it even closer, you'll see that here on the left is the bathroom, but here on the right is the door to the outside of the plane. And when the man went to go check on Alfred, he said that this door was unlatched. There are so many theories as to what happened to Alfred. Did he accidentally go through the wrong door? Was he pushed out of the plane? He was the 3rd richest man in the world at the time. Did he orchestrate his own disappearance? We are doing a full deep dive on this story this week on the pod, and I'm doing it with Murder with My Husband, so you don't want to miss it.
His mother posted this cryptic message on Facebook before vanishing. 25-year-old Michaela Standridge was last seen in Concrete, Washington on the 21st of April 2023. Disturbingly, she vanished after running away from the house she was staying in and calling 911. Michaela is a single mother of a 2-year-old son. She'd been staying in Skagit View Drive and at 5:04 a.m. called the police. Worryingly, she was heard on the line screaming and shouting for help, but the phone went dead. When police arrived to the location that she called from, she was nowhere to be seen. She completely vanished and has not been seen or heard from since. Investigators found her phone near the river near the house that police had arrived at. Searches were undertaken of the river and surrounding area, but no luck. Concerningly, 5 days before she vanished, she posted this cryptic message on Facebook. It read, "If I ever go missing or anything, just know I didn't leave." Michaela's case remains unsolved and she still has not been heard from, so police are urging anyone with any information to get in contact with them.
If you've ever gone into a rabbit hole about the Paris catacombs, then you need to hear about the Palermo catacombs, because I would argue that they are even more terrifying. These catacombs are from the 1500s and they have 1,200 full mummified bodies, unlike the Paris catacombs, which only has bones. One of the most famous bodies inside of these catacombs, and just a heads up, this is pretty intense, is a 2-year-old girl named Rosalia Lombardo. This is a sketch of Rosalia. She was one of the last people to be placed inside of the catacombs, and she is in near perfect condition. Rosalia died in 1920 of the Spanish flu, and her father specifically asked that she be placed inside the Palermo catacombs. And because she never really decomposed, there's photos of her from the 1980s where she looks just like a sleeping child, even though at that point she was 60 years old. In 2009, she started showing signs of discoloration, so they put her in this hermetically sealed glass case. The next slide has a photo of her just to illustrate a phenomenon that had been happening, so just a heads up. Before she had been put in the glass case, guests would actually complain about seeing her eyes open, which was shocking to them because she was in such perfect condition, but they could actually see how crystal blue her eyes were. Like, they definitely weren't hallucinating this happening. Employees explained that it was just a trick of the light. Her eyes actually hadn't fully closed, so depending on how the light was, her eyes looked more open or more closed. But some people are so afraid of seeing that happen that they refuse to visit the catacombs. Would you ever go?
Took the life of my pregnant wife and my 2 daughters to start a new life with my mistress. My name is Christopher Watts, and on August 13th, 2018, my wife's best friend went to my home and alerted the police because my wife was not responding to her calls. The police arrived promptly, and I allowed them to search my house. But of course, they found no signs of life for my wife, Shanann Watts, or my 2 children. The police, surprised by my lack of concern, I simply told them I didn't know where she was. Very quickly, the FBI identified me as the prime suspect in this disappearance. I then pretended to make a plea for help. A few days later, I was interrogated and I was subjected to a lie detector test. But I quickly broke down after failing the polygraph, confessing everything to my father. After that, I placed my wife's body in the back seat and drove my daughters to an oil site. I first smothered Bella with a pillow and then my second daughter, Celeste. I then buried the bodies in 2 oil tanks. I pleaded guilty in November, and on November 19th, 2018, I was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole.
This woman was burned alive in a car this year and her murder is still unsolved. Mercedes Vega was just 22 when she was last seen on the 16th of April this year. Security cameras actually captured her walking into her apartment's parking garage just after 9 p.m. She had planned to go out and meet with friends but never actually made it to her car. The following day at around 1 a.m, officers responded to a call about a car on fire. Tragically, when they arrived at the scene, they found Mercedes' burned body. She was found in the back seat of the vehicle, and interestingly, it wasn't actually her vehicle that she was in. The vehicle was found at the side of Interstate 10 in Tonopah. Interestingly, her car was actually found abandoned near Mill Avenue in Tempe. The owner of the car that she was found in has still not yet been determined. According to the medical examiner, she had been tortured, shot in the arm, and had blunt force trauma to her head. She was also found to have traces of bleach in her mouth, and horrifically, it was determined that this happened while she was alive. She was found to have passed away from being burned alive due to smoke inhalation. Items were recovered from the car that she was in, including lighter fluid and gloves. Disturbingly, her case is still unsolved and her killer or killers are still walking free.
He killed, raped, and ate a student, and was never convicted of it. My name is Issei Sagawa, and I'm known for committing acts of unspeakable morbidity in 1981. The son of a wealthy Japanese industrialist, I was sent by my father to France to study literature at a prestigious university in the capital. On June 11th, 1981, I lured into my apartment a Dutch student from my university, René Hartevelt, then aged 24. To do so, I pretended to need help recording a poem in German, a language René mastered. As she recited the poem, I pulled out a gun and shot her in the back of the head. The whole scene was recorded on a dictaphone. I then raped her and extracted 7 kilograms of her flesh to eat. I took her nose, lips, tongue, arms, thighs, genitals, and anus, which I consumed cooked or raw over the next 3 days. During this time, I took a multitude of photographs that today bear witness to my actions. I then separated the rest of her body into 2 suitcases, which I intended to dispose of in the woods. But a couple noticed my strange behavior and alerted the police. I was arrested 3 days later and claimed the act was artistic. I also told the police that if I'd had a freezer, they wouldn't have found me. My case caused quite a stir at the time, all the more so as the abolition of the death penalty was voted through a few months later in France. As I was then considered to be suffering from psychiatric disorders, and therefore not criminally responsible under French law, I was never convicted and was interned in a hospital before being transferred to Japan. As the case was dismissed in France, I was never convicted in Japan, where I became known for my actions. I died last November at the age of 73.
That TikToker named Rory Teasley was murdered the day he posted that chilling final video. So, a little bit of a backstory. Rory was known on TikTok as Too Pumped for TV. Before his tragic and unfortunate murder, Rory had amassed over 265,000 followers here on TikTok. As you can see, his videos got a lot of views. He was just posting this wholesome, positive content that he wanted to brighten people's days. So Rory lived in Pontiac, Michigan, which is nearby Detroit. But unfortunately, on January 6, 2022, Rory's life would be ended abruptly. On that day, Rory was playing the game Overwatch with his boyfriend, DeQuinn Watkins. Now, at some point during the gameplay that evening, DeQuinn and Rory got into some sort of an argument. And DeQuinn just took this a step far and began to strangle Rory. Eventually, this ended with Rory being strangled to death on the couch in his home. And later that evening, DeQuinn called 911 and reported that his boyfriend was sleeping on the couch and wouldn't wake up. When authorities arrived at the home, they found Rory lying unconscious on the couch. When he was taken to the hospital, yes, he was pronounced dead. So this trial happened pretty quickly, and just this year, DeQuinn pled no contest to second-degree murder charges, and he was quickly sentenced to 15 to 99 years in prison. It's unclear what caused this argument over a video game to escalate into a murder, but sadly Rory died that day, and people online are still trying to preserve his memory by reposting his TikToks and sharing his story. And yeah, this is just another tragic TikTok story that obviously did not need to happen and should never happen.
When 10-year-old Katie Coleman was murdered, she got revenge from beyond the grave. Katie walked out of her home in Indiana on January 25, 2005. Her mum had asked her to go to the dollar store to pick up some toilet roll. She'd walked this route thousands of times before. Sadly, this would be the very last time. It wasn't unusual for Katie to stop by a friend's house on her way home, but when she hadn't returned home by 7:30, her mum Angie became concerned, and after walking the neighbourhood and finding no sign of her daughter, she called the police and reported her missing. Over 100 people joined the search for Katie, and a witness came forward to say that they'd seen Katie the day after she disappeared in a white Ford pickup truck with a man. A composite sketch of the driver was released to the public, and he was described as a white, thin male, about 5'8" and between 18 and 21 years old. On January 30th, 2005, 5 days after Katie went missing, her body was found in a pond near Cypress Lake. Her hands were tied behind her back. She'd been raped and then discarded like rubbish. A witness later led police to a man called Anthony Stockelman, saying that it was his truck that Katie had been seen in. Police questioned him, and after doing a polygraph test, he passed it and they had to let him go. Just a couple of months later, police managed to trace DNA from a cigarette butt found near Katie's body back to Anthony, and he was arrested and charged with Katie's murder and rape. Anthony received a life sentence for murder plus 30 years for rape after accepting a plea deal to take the death penalty off the table. The twist in this story that nobody saw coming was that Anthony was on the same wing with Katie's cousin. Jared Harris learned that his cousin's killer was on the same wing and repeatedly threatened his life, and on September 22, 2006, he slipped into Anthony's cell brandishing a tattoo gun. He held him down by the throat and tattooed the words "Katie's Revenge" across his forehead, a permanent reminder of what he did to an innocent little girl.
This is the disturbing UK case of the child who killed a child. In July 2018, 8-year-old Alicia McPhail was abducted from her bed. She had been staying with her parents on the Isle of Bute. She'd gone to sleep watching Peppa Pig, and no one had any idea of the horrors that would unfold. Meanwhile, 16-year-old Aaron Campbell was drinking with friends at his house. It's reported that Aaron became upset in the night due to arguing with his mum. He'd had a challenging upbringing involving alleged physical and emotional abuse. Aaron decided he would get some substances from a couple he knew. The couple in question were Alicia's dad, Robert, and his girlfriend. They were actually known to sell substances around the area, but Aaron couldn't get hold of them. Intending to steal the substances, he armed himself with a kitchen knife and headed to their house. This was Robert's house, where he lived with his parents and girlfriend. When Aaron arrived, he noticed the little girl sleeping and took the opportunity to do the unthinkable. He snatched little Alicia from her bed and carried her to a secluded location. He essayed her and killed her. He then threw some of his clothes into the sea. At 6 a.m. the next day, the grandparents of Alicia noticed the little girl was missing. They rang police and alerted the locals. Family actually texted Aaron and asked him to keep a lookout for the little girl, and he responded by texting, "Oh damn, I'm sure she's not went too far." A local man soon discovered the lifeless body of the little girl around a 15-minute walk away from the house. It was Aaron's mum who actually checked the CCTV footage from her house and noticed her son leaving their home and returning that night. She handed the footage over to the police. Aaron was arrested, and it was found that his DNA matched the clothes recovered from the beach. The kitchen knife was also recovered, and Aaron's mum confirmed it was from her kitchen. Aaron's Google history showed that he had searched "How do police find DNA?" and also visited a website about collecting DNA evidence. He was given a life sentence of 27 years, which was reduced to 24 on appeal.
This TikToker named Bethany Martin was arrested after stealing jewelry off a corpse. I am not kidding, this story actually happened in Texas in 2021, so let's look into it. So that video that I showed you was a real video that 17-year-old Bethany Martin made and posted on TikTok. So obviously this would be a concerning video to see just from the beginning, but when you learn the details of what happened when they found said body, you're going to be disturbed. So on July 26, 2021, Bethany Martin, who was 17 at the time, and a 16-year-old friend of hers went out for a walk. While they were on this walk through a recently developed neighborhood, they saw something strange in a drainage ditch and went to go check it out. And what they found was the body of 25-year-old Marcus Adams, pictured here. He had recently passed away after taking his own life in the area, and his corpse was just down there in the drainage ditch. No one had found him yet. So a normal person would call the police, right? But no, not Bethany and her friend. So what they ended up doing was stealing jewelry from the dead man's body. So the girls actually reached down and unhooked a medallion and a gold necklace from Marcus's neck. And while they were doing all of this, they filmed it and posted it on their Snapchat story. This was a public video that anybody that was friends with them could watch. And there is footage of this out there. It's extremely disturbing, so obviously I'm not going to put any of it in here. But yeah, and when you watch the video, you can tell that they're not treating this seriously. They're laughing, they're making jokes, saying, "Oh, I can't believe we're doing this, ha ha ha," laughing. I'm like, they're robbing a dead body. And then they post these TikToks. So after that video from Snapchat began circulating, it eventually worked its way into the hands of the police, and Bethany and her friend were taken into custody. From the outside looking in, Bethany seemed like a totally normal girl. And like I said before, she was a TikToker. She had 50,000 followers. But now she's been charged with robbing a corpse or grave. I couldn't find anything online about whatever actually came out of this, but if anybody knows the resolution or the end to the story, please let me know.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look at there.
This 20-year-old murdered his family a day before this photo was taken. Alan Ruby, a freshman at the University of Oklahoma in 2014, murdered his entire family, and the next day he drove down to Dallas for the OU Texas football game, where he stayed in a hotel with his friends and posted this photo on his Instagram in what I assume would be an attempt to build an alibi. It didn't work, and he quickly confessed and received multiple life sentences. Shortly after the arrest, Alan confessed to the triple murder. He said he stole his father's gun and approached his mother in the kitchen, and when his mother Catherine turned to him, he shot her in the head. After she fell to the floor, she still showed signs of life, so Alan advised that he fired a second shot into her. Catherine Jr., his sister, was washing her car outside when she came into the kitchen. Alan then shot her once. He informed investigators that he believed she had died instantly. Alan then waited for his father to come home from work around an hour later. And as soon as his father John entered the home, Alan shot him in the head. He said that his father said ouch as he fell to the ground. He noticed there was still signs of life, so he shot his father once again. Alan said that after the murders, he took the surveillance footage from the home recording system and fled to the University of Oklahoma in the Jeep that his father bought him as a gift. He then went to a party at the Ritz-Carlton. According to Alan, he had been motivated to commit the murders because he had been cut off financially by his family, and was also being investigated for having stolen and forged $17.5 thousand worth of checks. Alan stated that he believed if he killed his family, he would inherit their estate. Alan Ruby would eventually plead guilty to 3 counts of murder and was sentenced to serve 3 consecutive life sentences without parole and no contact with his family or with the media. His family had requested the life sentences, and according to District Attorney Jason Hicks, if they had not done so, he most likely would have been sentenced to death. If you're wondering, the purpose of Alan not having contact with his family or the media was to avoid the possibility of a book or movie deals where Alan would profit. This woman created some of the worst videos on the internet. This is Ashley Richards from Houston, Texas. In 2015, she pleaded guilty to 4 counts of producing and 1 count of distributing these disturbing videos I'm about to explain to you. This all started in 2012 when the group PETA, or the group known as the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, contacted the Houston police about a video they had found online. This film was titled Ebony Kill Cat, and it depicted extremely sadistic and cruel acts being forced upon a kitten. So the police got in contact with the people from PETA, and they then sent them an additional 20 videos. These videos depicted the sadistic torture of various animals, including kittens, a fish, pigeons, crayfish, mice, and a rabbit, all being tortured with different things like high heels, knives, screwdrivers, and also pliers. In the videos, the woman that appeared in them was wearing a Mardi Gras style mask, and she would talk suggestively to the people watching this torture, meaning that there were people actually out there paying to watch this sadistic stuff happening, and also paying the woman to produce these horrific videos. And the worst part about these videos is that she would urinate and slowly torture and chop up live dogs, cats, rabbits, and mice. Absolutely inhumane stuff. Eventually, the police would track Ashley's IP address, which led them to her suburban home in Houston. This then led them to Brent Justice, who were the two people producing these horrible videos and selling them on a website online. And Congress had recently passed a bill making this specific type of video material, otherwise known as Crush P, illegal, so thankfully these two were arrested. But Brent Justice, after the trial, was actually sentenced to 50 years in prison. However, Ashley, the woman who actually carried out these acts on camera, was only sentenced to 10 years in prison, which is just insane. This case is absolutely sickening, and both of these people definitely deserve life sentences. I'm usually good with true crime cases and disturbing stuff, but when it comes to animal cruelty, it just hits different and more shocking, honestly. This is just crazy, and I can't believe people actually do this.
What kind of mother drives their 6-year-old child to the highest bridge they can find and then throws them off the edge? This kind. This is Gillian McCabe, and this is the murder of London McCabe. London was born in 2008 in Oregon to parents Gillian and Matt. In 2011, he was diagnosed with severe autism. He was described by his teacher as an animated, expressive little boy who was full of love. He loved to sing and make people laugh. London was the centre of his parents' world, but when Matt was diagnosed with MS, it all became a bit too much for Gillian, and in 2014, she began researching ways to kill her son. Prosecutors would later use her search history in her trial. On November 3rd, 2014, Gillian put London in the car, drove to Yaquina Bay Bridge in Newport, walked him to the edge, lifted him up, and threw him over the side. She then calmly walked back to the car, and as she heard her son's body hit the water, she dialed 911 and told them what she'd just done. Police had to then ring London's dad Matt and ask him to corroborate the story and make sure London wasn't with him. They then had to tell him that his son was missing, presumed dead, after being thrown off the edge of a bridge. Boats and divers were dispatched, and just a few hours later, London's lifeless body was pulled from the water. The most horrific thing is that the fall didn't kill London. It broke his bones, but what ultimately killed him was drowning. Gillian was arrested and charged with murder. Her internet history showed that she'd searched things like temporary insanity, insanity defence, and different ways to kill a child, such as stabbing or dropping from a 133-foot bridge, the exact height of the bridge that she dropped London from. Medical records show that she'd admitted herself into hospital a couple of times, claiming that she was suffering from mental illness, but that she was given a clean bill of health both times and discharged. Prosecutors in Gillian's trial said that London's murder was carried out with much calculation and that she'd faked mental illness in the hopes of getting off with a lighter sentence. Gillian was found guilty and was sentenced to life with a minimum of 25 years. In a statement from London's dad Matt, he said, "I can't say enough about this boy. He was my pride and joy. He was the centre of my world, and his loss leaves a hole in the centre of my universe. If you know an autistic individual, they need love too, probably more than you and I."
This is 3 Guys, 1 Hammer, one of the most sickening videos on the internet explained. Before I begin, I just want to say never go searching for this video. 3 Guys, 1 Hammer was leaked to a United States shock site in 2008. On your screen right now are the killers. The video begins with the man riding a bike down a street when the killers kick his wheels and strike him with a hammer off the bike. The poor victim was just going for a normal bike ride, but it ended up turning into one of the most brutal murders ever. They then take the victim into the woods where the victim is lying on the ground, and it's very clear the victim has already taken a lot of damage. He is semi-conscious and clearly has been struck in the head and face with a hammer. The video then continues to the 2 boys taking turns smashing the victim's face in with a hammer. And the victim's face is just progressively getting worse and worse. It's as if you got a pack of strawberries and just stomped on it. That's what the victim's face looked like. It was completely caved in and red and was 100% unrecognizable. There was blood bubbles as he tried to breathe, his face was just completely mangled and smashed. And if I'm not mistaken, they also put a cardboard box over his head. And the worst part is, the victim was in and out of consciousness throughout the entire video. Also, the sound of him trying to breathe with all the blood and his disfigured face is absolutely horrible. The killers continue hitting the victim in the face with the hammer. They then take out a screwdriver and begin stabbing the victim in the stomach countless times, and then the one killer takes the screwdriver and begins stabbing the victim's eyes out, all while he's still alive. The victim then tries to cover his eyes, which shows that he's still conscious, which is just so unsettling to watch. The killers put this guy through pure hell. I could only imagine the fear, loneliness, and pain the victim had to be experiencing. Eventually, the killers got bored and just wanted to finish the job, so they hit the victim in the head with the hammer a couple more times, extremely hard, which ends up killing the victim. Another disturbing part that stands out to me in this video is that at one point you can hear a car passing by, which turned the killers completely quiet until it passed. And once it did, they just continued brutally murdering the victim. The victim's name was Sergei Yatsenko, and he was just a normal guy going through his normal day when these demons just decided to do this to him. It's just pure murder with no motive at all. Never go searching for this video, please. Everyone who watched it never watched it again and urges everyone not to look it up. It's not the gore that makes it one of the worst, it's the pure evil these kids possessed. Because why in the world would you do this for fun? Rest in peace to Sergei, and I can't believe sickening stuff like this happens.
This woman screamed, "I don't want to die," as she was dragged to her death in a horrifying theme park incident. Kelty Byrne was a Canadian student, animal trainer and competitive swimmer. She was working at Sealand of the Pacific to earn extra money, and this involved being trained to work with orcas, otherwise known as killer whales. In controversial theme parks such as Sealand of the Pacific and SeaWorld, huge animals are either bred in captivity or traumatically captured and ripped apart from their families and natural habitats for humans' entertainment. On February the 20th, 1991, Kelty was working a shift and 3 whales were in one of the pools, including the infamous Tilikum. In a horrific turn of events, Kelty accidentally slipped and fell into the whale pool and attempted to grab onto the edge and save herself. However, before she could do so, she was grabbed by one of the whales that dragged her into the pool. The 3 whales then began throwing Kelty around, with many speculating that they may have simply thought this was a game. Others theorised that the whales were so traumatised and angered by their lives in tiny little pools that they took it out on Kelty. She was dragged under the water and then back up, screaming, "I don't want to die." After this horrific ordeal, she eventually drowned. It's reported that she was absolutely covered in bruises, was completely battered, and also covered in teeth marks. If I didn't know this was a true crime case, I would think it was a disturbing horror film. On the morning of the 7th of October 2022, a barefoot woman was running around Excelsior Springs, Missouri, bashing on people's doors. Witnesses describe her looking like she came straight from a horror film, and she was calling for help. She'd been beaten, held captive, and SA'd for weeks. The woman was a shocking sight. She was covered in injuries and was wearing a bin bag. Disturbingly, she was gasping for breath as she had a very tight metal collar locked round her neck. It was a nurse who opened the door to her and let her come in. The nurse started to call police, and at this point the woman panicked. She warned her that the captor would kill her and claimed that he had killed her 2 friends. When police got there, the woman explained that a man called Timothy had captured her the month prior. He'd been holding her hostage this whole time. She said he'd been keeping her locked in the basement and had been SAing her. Disturbingly, she told police that he actually had a young son who lived at the house with him. When Timothy had taken his young son to school the one day, she used it as her opportunity to escape. Police made their way to the home of 39-year-old Timothy Haslett Jr. and found the property did in fact have a basement like the woman described. Timothy was arrested and is facing 9 charges, including first-degree kidnapping. He's being held on a $3 million bond and faces 5 life sentences. Before his arrest, police were actually called to his address 3 times. Twice they were asked to do welfare checks, and this was from an employer and also family members. Police have searched his home with cadaver dogs and they haven't yet released what they know.